Howdy folks. Today we're going to be working on Chuck's Jeep here. As you remember from when we left off from the inspection, the thing wasn't idling right and there was a lot of contamination in the fuel tank. So today we're going to be starting in by draining the fuel and putting a fuel filter onto the line coming into the carburetor, and trying to get the carburetor adjusted and see if we can't get it to idle and run right. So if we get that done, we're also going to do a good lube job on it, because I don't believe that it's had any grease hit those grease zerks in a long time. So we're going to go ahead and do that today. So stick around and we'll see what we got going. Okay, we're going to start off by pulling the driver's door off. It's fairly easy to do, and we need to have a little bit better access to the fuel tank. We may have to pull the fuel pump out of it, so we need to have a little bit more room. Now we have to get our gas pump and get the fuel pumped out, the bad fuel pumped out of the tank. Okay, now the setup I have for doing this is a little electric fuel pump, a couple of fuel hoses, and this is a 12-volt power supply. This is pretty old school stuff here, and we'll just go ahead and drop the inlet line down into the tank. And as you can see, to remind you of how nasty this is, I don't know how well you can see down in there, and then we're just going to pump what we got in there into the tank. When it finishes, we'll pull the drain plug on the bottom of the tank and then let it drain down into a catch pan. So we'll get this hooked up and going. First thing we got to do is pull the little fuel strainer thing out, and it is, oh good lord. Okay, I need to get grip here. The inlet sign down into the tank, now down into the fuel jug, flip power supply on, and we do have a little bit of a fuel filter on the inlet side of the fuel pump, so it doesn't end up screwing up my fuel pump. A lot of times you would go ahead, and what I would normally do would be unhook the hose at the fuel pump, but because this particular vehicle has a fuel tank or a fuel pump inside the tank, I don't want to try pulling all of this crud that's in the tank through that fuel filter, that wrap that's on there, because those are not real common. They're not real hard to come by, and when you can find them, they seem to be kind of expensive. And I sure as heck don't want to ruin the inside the tank fuel pump. Those are really hard to come by nowadays, and when you do find them, they're about 300 bucks. So I do not want to have to do that. Okay, well, it appears, judging by the flow that's coming out of my fuel pump, that the crud in the bottom of the tank has plugged up my fuel filter. So we're going to have to get out get the air compressor out and blow out the fuel filter. I think I may go ahead and change it to a glass element fuel filter so it's easier to clean them out. So we'll get that done. Okay, now that we've got a larger fuel filter on it, now we might be able to go ahead and get everything cleaned out of there without too much more trouble. But just looking down into the tank from here, it's not looking pretty. So I got a feeling we're going to have to pull the tank. So while we're waiting for it to pump out, I'm going to get the front seat pulled out. And I'm going to show you guys just what it takes to pull the front seat out of one of these things. Not much. As you can see, right back there, there's a little clip that's already been undone that holds the back of the seat down. And then the front of the seat, you've got pins. Pull the pins out. Move the fuel pump out of the way. And out comes the seat. Okay, just like that. And I realized that that was probably not very cinematic, but it is what it is. I'm doing this by myself, so, and the dog is not a very good, Butters there is not a very good cameraman. So I don't know if you guys can see down into that tank, but that is just really, really nasty stuff down at the bottom of that tank. Okay, I think it is pumped out about as much as can be pumped out. There's leaves in the bottom of the tank here. We're going to shut the pump off. Let everything drain back down. So I think the next step is going to be to pull the, we're going to pull the drain plug, let it drain down to the, into the pan. That is nasty gas. Icky. That is the kind of crud that was down in the bottom of that tank. We may have to take it up somewhere and have somebody boil it out. I don't know. Okay, we've got to first disconnect the electrical. This is for the fuel gauge sending unit. I don't know what the heck he had this wired in for. that is for the fuel pump. We're going to slowly try to make sure that these break loose so we don't break anything off in the tank. And once we can get these all broke loose by hand, then I'll come back in with my air or my electric ratchet and pull the bolts out the rest of the way. And we're going to need, it looks like, 9/16 tubing wrench and a 7/16 tubing wrench with 3/8. So we'll grab all of them and see. Okay, get this one loose. Before we get too much further carried away, I gotta find a receptacle for all these bolts. These magnetic trays are awesome. Don't matter where you get them from. But they sure make the job go a lot better. This type of crap here, folks, is what happens with this ethanol-based fuel. And when you leave, you gotta, if you got a vehicle that you're going to store for an extended period of time, you either got to fill the thing all the way full or drain it completely. I would recommend draining it completely, because this is what you get when you don't do that. We're going to show you what kind of a mess. I'm going to show you what kind of a mess is inside this tank. Yeah. This is not something that I can quickly and easily clean. Oh, we may end up having to replace the tank. Well, I'm hoping we don't have to replace the tank. But what I'm going to do is we're going to take it, I'm going to pull the tank out and see if we can't flush some of this crud out of the inside. We're going to spray it down real good with some cleaner and a water-based solvent, and then wash it out real good with a pressure washer and see what we can come up with. See if we can clean it up enough to make it at least serviceable. Alright, well, we are going to go ahead and pull the tank. Get this cap put back on. last one's going to be the pain. Thought I was going to break that one. All right, and out comes the tank. Neat. There we go. Well, the good thing about it is that the bottom of the tank isn't horrible. That's just a wear spot. It's not a thin spot. So there's probably a pretty good chance that we can fix this tank, that we can clean it out. We're going to have to let it air out for a couple of days, probably get the gasoline smell out of it. Although I don't believe that the gasoline that was in there was probably all that combustible anymore. But we'll get the pressure washer out and we'll go ahead and clean some of this stuff up and go from there. All right, so while we are waiting for the fuel tank to degasify itself, we're going to go ahead and pull the carburetor off and make sure that internally it's, you know, the passageways and things like that are clean. We're going to have to be very careful with this carburetor because I do not have a rebuild kit for this. They are available, they are out there, but they're not quickly and easily available. And it don't look horrible, but you can see this nasty green stuff at the bottom of the carburetor. So we'll get this over on the table behind us and pull the bowl off at least and take a look at it. Okay, let's see what this carburetor looks like inside. Now it looks nice and clean. That actually does not look too bad. I have seen way, way worse than this. But what we are going to do is we're going to check the floats. And see if they're within adjustment. This gasket doesn't look to be in great shape, but it should be okay. All right. We'll take this and we'll blast it out with some carburetor cleaner. There is some dust and there is some crud down in there. So let's pull the accelerator pump off. And hopefully we don't end up screwing up the diaphragm here. Normally I would be doing this in my shop, but the lighting in my shop sucks. It's a nice day today, so I'm not too worried about it getting overly windy. And my shop, well, the bench that I usually do carburetor work on has got about 3 or 4 other carburetors on it right now. Diaphragm does not look to be in overly good shape, so yeah, there's a bunch of crud down in the bottom of the bowl here, so that tells me that there's probably a whole bunch of crud in just about every other port on this carburetor. Which could be one of the reasons why it doesn't idle very well. I think we may have to see what we can do about finding a replacement or finding a carburetor kit for it. Okay, these carburetors are actually pretty simple. So we are going to use our channel lock hammer here to knock the pin for the floats out. We're going to try to salvage as much of it as we can. I'm going to try to tear it apart and hopefully just clean out the ports and passageways just to make sure that we don't have anything overly plugged up or anything else like that. The biggest one is on these things is the idle circuit, and that's the little screw for adjusting it right there. And so I'm going to go ahead and find myself a little bitty screwdriver. This is a later model carburetor off of the contract date on this one, or manufacturer date is 79, so this would have been off an M151A2. And they did some funky things with the idle circuits with some of the later models that make them a little bit more difficult to tune. We've got a nice itty bitty screwdriver here. We'll see how far out he had it. Quarter turn, that's it. Okay, I think it should be a little bit further out than that. We'll get this apart and get some carburetor cleaner and blow out through some of this stuff. We're going to pull the need a wider screwdriver for that. I had to dig into some of the old school screwdrivers here. Not a lot of crud in there. But we'll get some carburetor cleaner here and blow out some of these ports. Now, surprisingly, I'm not finding a whole lot of crud in there. Let's get the old air schnozzle and... Okay. Always, whenever I do this, I try to blow them out from backwards so that anything that would have possibly come up and got dislodged in the ports will blow back out the way they came in. Sometimes it doesn't always work out that way, but like the emulsion tube here, I can't get in from the front side to blow that out without completely disassembling this thing, and that's just not going to happen today. Okay. tip on this one doesn't look bad. It doesn't look great, but it's not bad. So this is not a carburetor rebuild by any stretch. This is a carburetor inspection, cleanup, and put back together and hope that it works. I don't know if you can see that, folks, but that little knurled end there is what keeps this pin from backing out. When you put it on, slide that in there and then take your good crescent hammer and tap it in there. Doesn't have to go in very far, just enough so that it won't back out. And then we'll go find the manual and figure out what the specs are for this carburetor for the float settings. Okay, I couldn't find the manual itself, but I did find my online manual, which tells me what the floats are supposed to be. And it's supposed to be measured with the gasket on, which, boy, is not looking good at all. And I screwed up and put the float back on before I put the gasket on. Let us rectify that here shortly, quickly. And from the edge of the float here, it's supposed to be 9/32 of an inch. And it is reading 7/32. So we need to get a pair of needle nose pliers. And that tweaked it way too far. And that is reading 9/32 right there. So now we'll just tap this back into place using the needle nose hammer and the screwdriver punch. And go ahead and get that with a little bit of carburetor cleaner and hopefully clean whatever that nasty looking stuff was off of there. And then, yeah. Alright, now we need to go get this diaphragm is smoked. I'm gonna have to find another diaphragm for the accelerator pump. I'm gonna have to go into my hidey hole of parts to try to find another carburetor that's got a good diaphragm on it. But we're going to get, well, before I do that, we'll clean off these parts. clean the dirt and crud off the main jet. And go get the bowl out of the parts washer tank. Okay. Okay. Now it's cleaned out. That goes back in there. And the main jet goes back into the bottom of the bowl. Now this is not the ideal way to try to fix this, because normally what I would do would be to get a complete rebuild kit, knock all of the manufacturing plugs out of it, and go through and clean it up extremely well. But seeing as that we don't have carbs easily accessible to us to get this done, we're going to throw this back together and see what we get. Alright, there we go. Alright, well, after searching, we found an accelerator pump diaphragm that's in much better shape than the one that was on it. So I'm going to throw this back together, and well, hopefully we don't get any leaks. One of the other things that I noticed off camera was the intake manifold gasket, or the carburetor to intake gasket, happens to be an exhaust manifold gasket. So we're going to, but it is probably, I'm hoping that it's a fairly standard diameter and bolt spacing for a lot of other single barrel carburetors. So I've got a bunch of gaskets, a bunch of parts for old single barrel carburetors off of Jeeps and other things like that. So now we're going to put the idle adjustment screw back in, which is nice and clean now. Or the air bypass screw. We're going to bring it down till it bottoms. And then back it off 1.5 turns. And hopefully that is going to be much better than what it was. So I'm going to go try to find a gasket, and then we'll get this carburetor put back on. Once I get the carburetor put back on, I'm going to get a little gas can and use my little electric fuel pump set up to go ahead and pull some gas from a gas you know, a little gas can of some kind to go ahead and so that we can see if we can get this thing dialed in, get it at least tuned up and at least idling right. So we'll try to get that done today. Okay, now we did find an appropriately sized gasket, so we're going to throw this baby back on here and try to get some fuel lines hooked up to it and see if we can't get this thing to run idle a little bit better. Okay, we have our fuel system set up. So let's go ahead and give this a try. Fortunately, Chuck went ahead and modified this so that it didn't have the floor starter switch. So he's got a solenoid on it so that it starts with the on-off switch. So let's go ahead and give her some choke. Probably about 3/4 of the way. And let's see what we get. That's much better. And she still don't want to idle quite right. Let's sounds a whole lot better. I think we got the carburation issues taken care of. Okay, well, we've got her idling right, but before we get too much more carried away, we're going to check the coolant level and see how that is. We checked the oil before we tried starting it. The oil is full and it is nice and clean. We did that on the initial inspection. But we're going to check the coolant level now. And it is low, extremely low. So we're going to get some coolant put in this thing. Okay, this is a 50-50 mix. We'll see if this thing even had any coolant in it to begin with. Which apparently it did not. And that right there, my friends, is the reason why it did not have any coolant in it. This project just got a little bit more involved. Well, folks, that's about it for today. We're waiting on parts. The freeze plugs, nobody had them in stock in town, which doesn't surprise me. We ordered 2 different sizes because I'm not absolutely certain what size they are. One size is going to be in tomorrow. We'll see if that's the right size. If not, then we're waiting until Friday. We still have to get the fuel tank cleaned out. So unfortunately, what I was hoping we were going to be able to get done today, we're not able to get done today. So, we'll go ahead and keep plugging away at it until we get this thing so that it's reliable and so that it's drivable. And thanks for watching. Remember, like, share, and subscribe. If you like what we're doing here, I'm going to keep making these videos as long as you folks keep watching them. So thanks again.